When my mother told me she had met someone new, I tried to sound happy. I smiled and said all the right words. "I'm so happy for you, Mom. You deserve this." And I truly meant it, at least in that moment. For years, I had watched my mother move through life like someone who had forgotten what laughter felt like. After my father passed, the house became silent. Her mornings were filled with half-drunk coffee, and her nights ended with the television murmuring to no one. So when she mentioned his name, Jason, I told myself this could finally be her second chance. The day I met him, the sun was warm but the air smelled like rain. I remember it clearly because Jason carried that same kind of presence. He was calm, steady, and yet there was something beneath the surface that I couldn't quite define. He brought flowers for my mother and a small leather notebook for me. "Something to write your thoughts in," he said with a gentle smile. His voice was calm and deep, the kind that draws you in without effort. During dinner, he asked about my work, my favorite books, and what I dreamed about becoming. The way he listened made me feel seen. Not as someone's daughter, but as a person with her own story. It was strange and comforting all at once. That night, after he left, I opened the notebook he gave me. On the first page, he had written a quote in beautiful handwriting. It said, "Some people arrive quietly, and yet nothing is the same after them." I traced the words with my finger, not knowing how true they would become. As weeks passed, Jason became a familiar face around our home. His visits brought laughter back into my mother's life. He helped her fix small things around the house, made breakfast on Sundays, and told stories that always made her blush and say, "Oh, Jason, stop." I would stand by the kitchen doorway, watching them with a small smile on my face, while something unexplainable stirred quietly inside me. It wasn't jealousy. It was something softer, something I didn't have a name for. Maybe it was longing. Maybe it was curiosity. Jason had a way of filling spaces with peace. When he entered a room, it felt different, as if the air itself adjusted to his presence. One evening, I was sitting on the porch sketching the sky after the rain. He came outside holding 2 cups of tea and handed one to me. "You draw storms beautifully," he said. I smiled and replied, "It's easier than drawing calm." He looked at me for a while and said, "Maybe that's because storms show us who we really are." That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my mind, slow and steady, like a song I couldn't forget. I told myself it was just admiration. He was kind, thoughtful, and gentle. He cared for my mother and noticed things most people ignored. But somewhere deep inside, something was beginning to shift, quietly, like a tide turning without warning. Soon, Jason became part of every weekend. He and my mother would cook together, play old records, and laugh in a way that made the house feel alive again. Sometimes I joined them, but often, I just watched from a distance. And every now and then, Jason would look at me. Just a simple glance. A smile that lasted only a second. But in that moment, I felt something I couldn't explain. It confused me. It scared me. And yet, I didn't want it to stop. One afternoon, my mother went to visit a friend, and Jason stayed behind to fix a broken shelf. I sat in the living room pretending to read while watching him work. He moved quietly, focused, his sleeves rolled up. When he finished, he looked around the room and said, "You know, this house feels alive again." I smiled and told him, "You're the reason for that." He shook his head gently. "No, your mother is. I just reminded her what living sounds like." Something about the way he said that stayed with me. He didn't try to take credit. He didn't demand attention. He simply existed, and somehow, everything around him seemed to find balance. That night, I opened the notebook again and began to write. Without realizing it, every word became about him. His calmness. His kindness. The way his voice softened when he spoke. Each page felt like a quiet confession I could never say aloud. I knew I should stop. I knew he belonged to my mother. But writing about him felt safer than admitting what my heart was beginning to whisper. When my mother told me she had met someone else, I didn't think much of it at first. I had seen her go through heartbreak before, and a part of me was simply relieved that she was smiling again. But when she finally introduced him to me, everything inside me shifted. His name was Jason. There was something quietly powerful about him, the kind of presence that filled a room without trying. He was kind, attentive, and calm. He listened when people spoke, and when his eyes met yours, it felt like he could see straight into your thoughts. At first, I thought I was imagining things. I told myself that I was just curious about the man who had made my mother so happy. But slowly, his presence began to affect me. Every word he said carried weight. Every glance stayed longer than it should have. One evening, the rain fell endlessly, soft and rhythmic against the windows. The house was quiet. Mom had gone to bed early, and Jason and I sat together in the living room. A movie played on the screen, but neither of us was really watching. He asked me about my life, my studies, the things I loved. I didn't expect him to care so deeply about my answers, but he did. I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't done in years. I told him about my art, my fears, my small dreams that never seemed to fit anywhere. He listened carefully, nodding every now and then, his eyes warm and full of understanding. When I finally stopped talking, he smiled and said, "You have a gift, you know. Not everyone can see beauty the way you do." That night, I lay awake for hours. I kept hearing his voice in my head, replaying his words, remembering the way he looked at me as though I was something rare. I didn't know why it affected me so deeply. The following days passed quietly, but something between us had changed. I started noticing little things. The way he smiled when I entered the room, the softness in his tone when he said my name, the small pauses before he spoke. It was subtle, but I felt it. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen trying to fix a leaky faucet. Jason came in and stood beside me, rolling up his sleeves. "Let me take a look," he said gently. I stepped aside, but our hands brushed when he reached for the wrench. For a moment, neither of us moved. My heart skipped a beat. He worked in silence for a while, then glanced at me with that easy smile of his. "You're a lot like your mother," he said softly. "Strong, but kinder than you want people to see." I didn't know what to say. I smiled faintly and pretended to be focused on the dripping tap, but inside, my heart was racing. There was a warmth between us that I couldn't explain, and I was terrified of it. That night, I stood by my window, staring at the city lights below. I kept asking myself what was happening to me. Jason wasn't supposed to make me feel this way. He belonged to my mother. But feelings have a way of growing where they shouldn't, no matter how hard you try to stop them. Each morning when I saw him sitting at the breakfast table, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper, everything inside me stirred again. I told myself to be careful, to stay distant, to protect my heart. But with every passing day, I failed a little more. Love is not always loud. Sometimes it begins quietly, in small glances and shared silences, until one day you realize it has taken over your entire heart. And that was exactly what was happening to me. Have you ever fallen for someone you knew you shouldn't, but couldn't help how you felt? Don't forget to like, turn on notifications, share, and subscribe to Moonlight and Roses for more deeply emotional love stories like this one. The days that followed felt heavier than before. I tried to convince myself that what I was feeling for Jason was just admiration, maybe gratitude for the way he treated my mother and me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I found myself noticing him in ways I shouldn't have. The way he smiled when he walked into the room. The way his eyes softened whenever our gazes met. The way his laughter seemed to fill the whole house, making even the quiet corners come alive. Every little thing about him began to stay with me longer than it should have. I started avoiding being alone with him, yet every time he entered a room, my heart reacted before my mind could catch up. One evening, my mother had to leave town for a short business trip. She asked me to make sure Jason ate dinner, that he didn't overwork himself. I smiled and agreed, pretending it was no big deal. But the truth was, my chest tightened the moment she left. I didn't know how to face him without her there. That night, I set the table for two. Jason came home late, looking tired. His tie was loose, his sleeves rolled up, and there was a quiet weariness in his eyes. I had cooked something simple, nothing fancy, but when he saw it, he smiled with genuine warmth. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble," he said. "It's nothing," I replied softly. "I just didn't want you to eat alone." We ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with unspoken things, with the kind of understanding that didn't need words. At one point, our eyes met across the table. I looked away too quickly, pretending to focus on my plate, but I could feel his gaze linger. After dinner, he helped me clean up. The quiet between us felt deeper than before, charged with something fragile. When our hands brushed while reaching for the same glass, I froze. He did too. For a few seconds, we just stood there, our fingers inches apart, caught in a moment neither of us could name. He was the first to look away. He cleared his throat and said, "It's getting late. You should rest." I nodded, though sleep was the last thing on my mind. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. Every thought I tried to suppress came rushing back, louder, clearer. I wasn't imagining it anymore. Something was growing between us. Something real. Over the next few days, I noticed Jason trying to keep his distance too. He avoided small talk, spent more time outside, and when he spoke to me, his words were careful, almost rehearsed. But there was one thing he couldn't hide, the way he looked at me. One evening, I went out to the balcony to get some air. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. I heard footsteps behind me. Jason stepped out quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. He offered me one and smiled faintly. "Beautiful evening," he said. "Yes," I whispered. "It feels peaceful." We stood there for a while, watching the sun sink into the horizon. I could feel the tension between us, soft but undeniable. He spoke again, his voice quiet. "You know, it's strange how some people come into your life and change everything without even trying." I turned to look at him, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. "Yes," I said. "It's strange and unfair sometimes." He looked at me as if searching for something in my eyes, something he couldn't say out loud. Then he took a small step back, as if reminding himself where the line was. When he left the balcony, I stayed there long after the sun disappeared. I felt the wind against my skin and the ache in my chest growing stronger. The next morning, he acted normal again. We exchanged polite greetings over breakfast, spoke about simple things, and pretended everything was fine. But inside me, everything had changed. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It wasn't curiosity. It was something deeper, something that scared me and thrilled me at the same time. I was falling in love with the man my mother brought home. And no matter how wrong it felt, my heart refused to listen. Every part of me knew I had crossed an invisible line that could never be undone. Have you ever fallen for someone you knew was completely off limits, but your heart didn't care about the rules? Don't forget to like, turn on notifications, share, and subscribe to Moonlight and Roses for more heartfelt love stories that explore the beautiful and complicated sides of emotion. I thought I could control it. I told myself that what I felt for Jason was temporary, that it would fade if I ignored it long enough. But love, especially the kind that sneaks up on you, doesn't listen to logic. It lingers. It grows in the spaces you try to leave empty. Days passed, and each one seemed to pull us closer despite how much we tried to keep apart. He was everywhere. His laughter, his voice, the quiet sound of his footsteps in the hallway. I knew his routine without even trying to. When he came home, when he liked his coffee, when he sat by the window to read. I noticed everything, and that frightened me. One evening, it rained heavily. My mother had gone out of town again for work, leaving the house unnervingly quiet. I was curled up on the couch, reading, when the lights flickered and went out. Jason came into the living room holding a flashlight, his shirt slightly damp from the rain. "You okay?" he asked, his voice warm despite the chill in the air. "I'm fine," I said, smiling faintly. Just a little startled. He set the flashlight on the table, its soft glow filling the room with a warm, golden light. Then he joined me on the couch, just a small distance away. We sat there listening to the sound of rain hitting the windows. There was something about that moment that felt different, fragile, almost sacred. The world outside disappeared, leaving only us and the rhythm of the storm. Jason turned to me. "You know, it's been a while since I've had this kind of peace," he said. I looked at him, my voice barely a whisper. "Maybe peace has a way of finding you when you least expect it." He smiled, and for a heartbeat, neither of us looked away. His hand brushed mine gently, and I felt a rush of warmth run through me. It was innocent at first, just a touch, but it carried everything we had been trying to hide. I should have pulled away. I should have said something to break the silence. But instead, I stayed. His eyes searched mine as if waiting for permission, and when he spoke again, his voice trembled slightly. "This shouldn't feel this right," he murmured. My heart raced. "Then why does it?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The storm grew louder outside, and the space between us disappeared. His hand moved to my cheek, his touch soft, hesitant, as though he was afraid the moment would shatter if he breathed too loudly. I could feel his pulse racing under his skin, matching mine. When his lips brushed against mine, it wasn't fire or urgency. It was slow, tender, and unbearably real. The kind of kiss that tells you you're crossing a line but makes you forget why it was drawn in the first place. For a few seconds, the world stopped. All the noise, all the rules, all the fear faded away. It was just us, caught in something we couldn't name but couldn't let go of. When we finally pulled apart, I couldn't meet his eyes. The guilt hit almost as hard as the longing. I stood up, pretending to busy myself, but my hands were shaking. He whispered, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." I turned to him and interrupted softly, "Don't be." He looked at me then, with a mixture of confusion and desire, and in that moment I knew there was no turning back. Something had shifted between us forever. Later that night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling just like before. But this time, the memory of his touch wouldn't fade. It stayed with me, warm and dangerous, reminding me that love doesn't always come when it should, it comes when it must. And sometimes, it chooses the wrong people. Do you believe that some love stories are meant to happen, even if the timing and the people are completely wrong? When morning came, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. The memory of last night replayed again and again like a song I couldn't turn off. Jason's voice, his touch, the way he said my name, it all felt too real, too impossible to forget. I tried to bury it, to convince myself it was a mistake born out of loneliness and confusion. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. What happened between us wasn't an accident. It was something waiting to happen, something we'd both been quietly building toward without admitting it. When my mother came back from her trip, I thought I could hide it. I thought I could act normal. But guilt has a way of changing how you move, how you breathe, how you speak. She noticed almost immediately. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she asked as she unpacked her things in the living room. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." She studied me for a moment longer before turning away. "You've been quiet lately. Maybe you need to get out more, see your friends." I nodded, grateful she didn't press further. But even as she talked, I felt Jason's eyes on me from across the room. He didn't say a word, but that silence was heavier than anything else. Over the next few days, the house started to feel smaller. Every shared glance, every accidental brush of our hands carried a weight that words couldn't bear. I caught myself watching him too often, memorizing the curve of his smile, the way he tried to avoid my gaze when my mother was around. And she wasn't blind to it. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen to find her sitting quietly at the table, her expression unreadable. "You and Jason seem close," she said casually, stirring her tea. My heart skipped. "He's just been nice to me, that's all." She smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't match the expression. "Good. He's been good for me too." That last sentence sank like a stone in my chest. It was a reminder, one I desperately needed, but one that hurt to hear. That night, I stayed in my room, trying to distract myself with music and work, but nothing helped. My thoughts kept circling back to him. To us. To the fact that this secret was slowly becoming a storm neither of us could control. When I finally stepped out to get some air, I found Jason sitting on the porch, lost in thought. The moonlight softened his features, but his eyes looked tired, conflicted, like mine. "I can't keep pretending," he said quietly as I approached. I froze. "Pretending about what?" He looked at me, his voice trembling. "About what's between us. About how I feel." I wanted to tell him to stop, to remind him of everything we stood to lose. But the words wouldn't come. Because I felt it too. That pull. That ache. That impossible bond that kept growing no matter how wrong it was. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I whispered. "Neither do I," he said. "But every day, It feels harder to breathe around you and not say what's in my heart." For a long time, we sat there in silence, both knowing there was no easy way out of this. The truth was heavy between us, unspoken but alive. When I finally went back inside, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, and for the first time, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked like someone caught between love and betrayal, torn by a choice that could ruin everything. And maybe that's exactly who I had become. If love crosses a line that shouldn't be crossed, is it still love? Or just a beautiful mistake waiting to fall apart? I had always believed that secrets could be buried if you tried hard enough. That if you smiled through the guilt, no one would see the storm inside you. But I was wrong. The truth has a way of finding light, no matter how deep you try to hide it. The weeks that followed were heavy. Every day, I felt my mother watching me, not directly, but in that quiet, knowing way only mothers can. She asked fewer questions, but her silence spoke volumes. Jason, too, began to withdraw. The warmth in his eyes dimmed, replaced by the kind of fear that lives in people who know they've gone too far. One morning, I found her in the kitchen, staring out the window, her coffee untouched. "You've been distant lately," she said softly, not looking at me. "And Jason has too." My throat went dry. "He's just been busy." She turned to me then, her gaze sharp. "Busy avoiding me? Or avoiding something else?" I froze. There was no accusation in her voice, only sadness, and somehow that hurt more. I wanted to tell her everything, to free myself from the weight crushing my chest. But the words wouldn't come. My silence betrayed me. Her expression changed. I saw it in her eyes, that moment when doubt turns into realization. She didn't say anything else. She just nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had already feared. For the next few days, the house was unbearably quiet. Jason and my mother barely spoke, and when they did, it was forced, like strangers trying to pretend they still knew each other. I avoided him as much as I could, but sometimes our eyes met in passing, and the guilt in his eyes mirrored mine. One evening, my mother called me into the living room. She sat on the couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Jason was standing by the window, tense and silent. "Sit down," she said calmly. I obeyed, my heart pounding. "I want the truth," she said, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. "What's been going on between you two?" Jason turned away, his jaw clenched. I tried to speak, but my throat closed up. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, I whispered, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Tears filled her eyes. "Then why did it?" "I don't know," I said, my voice breaking. "It just did. I tried to fight it, but it—" "Stop," she said sharply, standing up. "Don't say another word." Jason stepped forward, his voice low. "It was my fault. I crossed a line I should never have crossed." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You think saying that makes it better?" He had no answer. None of us did. For a long time, she just stood there, silent. Then she walked toward the door and said quietly, "Both of you need to leave me alone tonight." When she was gone, the house felt colder. Jason looked at me, his eyes full of regret. "We destroyed something pure," he said softly. "Your mother trusted me. You trusted me. And now there's nothing left but pain." Tears streamed down my face. "I wish I could take it back." So do I, he said. But some things can't be undone. He left that night. No goodbye, no explanation. Just silence where his presence used to be. For days, I didn't see him. My mother avoided me completely, and the house that once felt full of life became a hollow shell. I walked past his room one last time, and the emptiness inside broke me in ways I didn't know possible. Sometimes I still wonder if what we felt was real, or if it was just loneliness dressed as love. Either way, it left a scar that time will never heal. Do you believe love can still be pure if it was born out of a mistake? Don't forget to like, turn on notifications, share, and subscribe to Moonlight and Roses for more stories that explore the fragile line between love, guilt, and redemption. Months passed before she could say Jason's name out loud again. When he left, he took more than just his belongings. He took the air out of the house, the laughter, the light. What was left behind was silence. The kind that lingers in every room and reminds her of what was lost. She and her mother lived like strangers for a while. They spoke only when they had to. Polite, cautious words that said nothing and meant everything. She could see the pain in her mother's eyes every time their gazes met. It was the reflection of her own. For a long time, she thought forgiveness was something other people gave you. That it came from outside, a mercy handed down. But as the weeks turned to months, she learned that forgiveness has to start from within. She had to forgive herself before she could face her mother. One afternoon, she found her mother sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. She hesitated before stepping outside. "Can I sit with you?" she asked quietly. Her mother nodded without looking at her. For a while, they just sat there, side by side, the way they used to before everything fell apart. The orange light of dusk wrapped around them, soft and forgiving. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said finally. "But I need you to know that I regret it every single day." Her mother didn't answer right away. Then she sighed. "You were young. And broken. And so was I. We both made choices we wish we hadn't." Her voice cracked a little on the last word. She looked at her mother, tears stinging her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," her mother said, her eyes glistening. "That's why it hurts so much." In that moment, the wall between them began to crumble. They cried, not just for what they lost, but for what they still had. Each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough to start over. Jason never came back. She heard he moved to another city, started a new life, maybe even found peace. Sometimes she wondered if he ever thought of them, or if their story had become just a distant memory. As for her, she learned that love is not always meant to last. Sometimes it enters your life to break you open, to teach you something about who you are, and then it leaves. She is not the same girl she was before he came into their lives. She is softer now, wiser, maybe even stronger. She still believes in love, but a different kind. The kind that doesn't hurt to hold. The kind that lets you breathe. When she looks at her mother now, she sees resilience. She sees a woman who found a way to rebuild after her world fell apart. And she hopes that in time, her mother will see that in her too. Because at the end of it all, this was not a story about forbidden love. It was a story about mistakes, forgiveness, and finding the courage to start again. And maybe that is what real love is. Not perfection, but the grace to keep going when everything inside you is broken. Dear viewers, Have you ever had to forgive yourself for something your heart could not control? Tell me in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, turn on notifications, and subscribe to Moonlight and Roses for more heartfelt stories about love, loss, and healing. See you in the next one.